So since I've been getting back into playing and teaching over the last couple of years, I found that there's a similar question keeps on coming up. And it's kind of along the lines of, what are you playing over that? Like, what notes are you choosing over that chord or that progression, that kind of thing. And it's kind of related to those other questions about, how do you play things that are kind of more outside and more, just different note choices. And I guess it's one of those big challenges as an improviser, whether you're, jazz or fusion or whatever your kind of thing is, how do you get more color into your playing? And how do you get interesting and beautiful lines and all that kind of stuff? I find that this kind of question, it often becomes really complicated really quickly. And it always, almost without fail, turns into a discussion around, what scale should you play over this particular chord? Do you play a Dorian scale or an Aeolian scale or a Locrian scale or a Phrygian, or maybe one of the modes of the harmonic minor, or maybe the diminished scale, the bebop scale, or the whole tone scale, or whatever. And it feels like it quickly becomes complicated. And I always kind of feel that, suddenly I'm thinking a lot about music, whereas I like to just have more of a listening relationship to music, if that makes sense. A good example of this kind of thing is, which kind of comes up as a standard thing in, any jazz course, I guess, at uni or whatever, about, what scale choice you could possibly choose over a dominant chord. And so if we have an example of like G7, G dominant 7 type of thing, one thing that comes up that people sort of talk about as a possible thing that you can play, possible set of notes, is an A flat melodic minor scale. And the idea around this is that the A flat melodic minor scale, the rationale is kind of like, well, the A flat melodic minor just happens to have all the really cool notes, cool chordal extensions that turn up in the G7 chord. So the first note of the A flat melodic minor is the flat 9 of the G7 chord, and the next one is the sharp 9, and the third, and the flat 5, and the sharp 5 kind of thing. So it's just this idea that, using a scale to kind of subset the 12 notes of the octave to come up with all the really cool notes, kind of thing. I found, for me at least, this type of approach is kind of problematic, and I think there's three main reasons why. The first one for me is just the pragmatic problem of often when you're playing music, the harmony's moving quite fast, and so the idea of trying to get there in time to pull off this, I've got to transpose something and then play in some melodic minor of some chord. So if I'm going, like, if I've got chords moving like that and harmonic changes kind of like that, then it's hard to sort of see how I would kind of get there in time to sort of play those notes. I think the second thing is probably a little bit more nuanced. The idea of the idea of playing grabbing some sort of scale to play over a chord. It's a bit more nuanced because if we go back to that example of this G7 dominant, often what determines what you play over that chord is its harmonic context. And what I mean by that, if this G7 is like a 5 chord heading to a 1, like I'm going to probably play something a little bit different than if it's if this G7 happens to be like a like a 3 dominant chord. I'm just thinking, if I was doing something like Someday My Prince Will Come. In that case, the G7 is kind of like, it's kind of got a different harmonic function, and it's kind of leading into, it's kind of modulating into a different key. And so I'd probably choose kind of different notes. And when you transcribe solos from records, you'll find this is kind of a thing, that note choice is really dependent on the context of the harmony. The third issue is that the idea of treating a scale as kind of like almost like it's a hack that you can use to find the cool notes, so I find it kind of misses the point of of what a scale actually kind of is. Like a scale is a really interesting structure in music, and it's this way to sort of bring a certain kind of texture based on a group of notes into sort of music. So sometimes, for instance, I'll be playing some sort of snaky, line full of lots of different sort of things, and then I'll finish in a way that kind of gives more the texture of a scale. So I don't know, like I'll just give an example. That kind of thing, where I'm doing, something snaky, and then I'm going to end up with some sort of pentatonic-y thing just because I'm kind of using the tension of all those kind of chromatic type lines to come into something that's a bit more, just a bit more calm or something like that. And so it's using a scale, like it's sort of, a scale has a different kind of function in that sense. I guess though I haven't really answered the question of, what do you play kind of thing? What should you work on and stuff? The best thing, and I always kind of say to students who are like really tend to be hitting this barrier of like working on all this stuff, but I can't get my playing to that next level. The best thing by far that you can do is transcribing solos. And I'm going to do a post on this because I think there's a particular way you should transcribe solos that's super helpful. And there's certain practices that you can kind of put in place when you transcribe, the way you kind of learn things and all that sort of stuff, where you can use that as a way to kind of change the problem that you're having, which is at the moment might be what notes do you kind of play and what scale do you play and all that kind of stuff, to just training your ears so you get to this level where it actually doesn't matter what you play because your ears will just take care of what to play next kind of thing. And that's after you transcribe a lot of music and kind of internalize it, that tends to happen, I think. But for this post, I wanted to just give a quick, I guess this is the exercises that I tend to give to students who are starting out on this journey, where they've been working on their playing and they just want to start moving in that direction of kind of getting a bit more kind of color and stuff. And so this is a nice kind of way to kind of start that journey, I think. And this exercise was given to me, I think, by Carl Orr, actually, about 35 years ago, or perhaps even longer. And it came out of a discussion. I think I was trying to work on Stella by Starlight, I think, and he was playing all these really beautiful kind of lines, and I was like, how are you playing? What notes are you choosing? What's this? What's that? And it just came out of discussion, I think, around sort of, how to begin to sort of think in that way. So this is a sort of preliminary exercise, and there's two parts of it. One is you just choose a chord shape first, and it doesn't matter what chord shape that you actually choose. For me, I'll just choose something like maybe this chord here, which is and I'll put a little note in the comments, like a little sort of one-pager PDF or something, just with the details of this. It doesn't matter what chords what chord you choose, just some sort of chord, not with any open strings, let's say, but just some sort of chord. So this is C major 7 on G. This chord here, it's got a G note and then a C note on the next string and then an E note and then a B. So C major 7 on G. And all this exercise really is that we're going to say that any of the notes in the chord, we'll call them target tones. And then we're just going to approach those target tones with in a couple of different ways. So the first thing I'm going to do is approach those target tones from a half step above. So I've got this C, the G, the C, the E, the B. If I go half step above, the first one is, then half step above, the second one, half step above, and then just come down again. And that's kind of it. It's that simple with a couple more permutations kind of thing. Same chord again. This time I'll do a half step above and half step below, leading to the target tone. And I'll pop this again in the PDF. It's a simple kind of exercise. And there's a couple more permutations that you could do. You could do a half step above and 2 steps below. So that kind of thing. Or you could do 2 above and 1 below, etc. sort of stuff. So this is a nice exercise, and it's also the kind of exercise that guitarists working on their playing tend to take any exercises and work out a million permutations for it. And it's not intended to do that. It's just like a basic exercise that you can just apply to any kind of chord shape and try and keep it pretty simple and straightforward. The one thing I tend to tell students as well with this one is, you could make it more interesting by like when you're practicing, grouping it in different ways rhythmically. So maybe I go, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. That just 5 or 7 or 9 or whatever. That's always a good thing to do. But the purpose of this exercise, and you can sort of like any type of thing, you can apply it to any chord. You could also kind of reverse it in a bit of a way. So instead of going, above, I could start and reverse and go below. That kind of thing. So there's a couple of different variations like that. So yeah, as I said, this is probably the first exercise that I tend to give students as a way to start this journey to kind of get more color into their playing. And what I really like about this exercise is it's kind of like, it moves you away from that mentality of like trying to find a scale or trying to, even trying to find things like I've got to find thirds and sevenths that I should be playing in my lines to outline the chord or an arpeggio or whatever, to actually just thinking more about something. I feel like you need to think a lot less for this. It's just really taking a shape that you kind of know and then putting a pattern around that kind of shape. But it's also, the benefits of doing this is you're kind of training or starting to train your ears a little bit to hear, what is the sound of a chord tone and what is the sound of a tension leading to a chord tone. That kind of stuff. You're hearing the sound of tension and resolution and that kind of stuff. And another great benefit of this exercise is which I'll do a post on down the track, but the idea that you're playing where the chord is. And this is kind of, so rather than kind of like playing scales, like actually playing. So one thing that's really handy to be able to do is like whatever you're playing, to be able to sort of relate it to a kind of a chord shape type thing. It's just kind of super handy. It'll really sort of help you playing. And this is a natural thing to sort of help with that. And the other cool thing about this exercise, and I think this is important with anything that you do, it's kind of like, it's not too hard to make it sound musical. So it doesn't sound too much like an exercise. You can sort of mix it up enough so it doesn't. And so often, I think, especially for guitarists, the kind of things that you practice sound like, like they're hard to translate into your playing in meaningful ways because it just feels like there's sort of these sort of practice patterns type kind of things. I'm going to leave it there, and then next time around, I'm just going to sort of build on this a bit, and then we'll kind of get into more kind of different chord shapes.